It was a nuclear nightmare come true, a highly trained technician gone berserk in a nuclear bomb store in Britain. 30 years later, the men and women who were there still carry the memory with them.
I was aware that if it blew up, that if he took that bomb out, we were going to die. That's all there is to it.
We were very disturbed when we heard little infiltrations of news coming through, the various husbands calling to their wives, telling us that the situation was serious and the whole east coast of England could go up.
Witnesses to what happened at Sculthorpe in Norfolk on that day still live in the United States. 30 years later, we tracked down and interviewed the man at the centre of the drama. Leander Cunningham, then an Air Force Master Sergeant. He now lives in retirement in a small town in Middle America. For 8 hours in 1958, he paralysed an American nuclear bomber base in Britain by threatening to fire into an atomic bomb. What shocked the US Air Force was that Cunningham was a member of their nuclear elite.
So you're not dealing here with, if you'll pardon the expression, an ordinary GI. You were dealing at that time with the cream of the crop. That's just not an ordinary outfit, my friend. And I don't want to leave any impression that they, or the English, or security, or anything at all, caused this incident. No spies, no outsiders, no nothing, except the deep feelings that came out of me and erupted at a very inopportune time.
In the 1950s, the base at Sculthorpe in Norfolk was one of the most strategically vital spots in Europe. Leander Cunningham was one of 6 senior nuclear weapons technicians in a bomber wing that stood ready to deliver NATO's nuclear punch. As the Cold War grew chillier, fleets of American bombers rehearsed for the terrible moment if war came. Britain's position as an island aircraft carrier put us in the nuclear front line. And as fears grew, CND warned that Norfolk was a prime target.
Inside, they sat down in protest, blocking the road and preventing lorries from entering. Police lifted them by...
Today, Sculthorpe is quiet. The base has a skeleton staff ready for use by the US Air Force in an emergency. But in 1958, this was the biggest American base in Britain. At one corner of the field, the nuclear bomb dump. In these bunkers was enormous destructive power. This was the age of the emergency war plan, kept a closely guarded secret at the time. If serious armed conflict with the Soviet Union broke out anywhere in the world, the United States Air Force was ready to launch a massive preemptive strike with more than 1,000 nuclear-armed bombers. Leading the way would be the tactical bombers based here in Sculthorpe. Going in behind them, the long-range strategic aircraft. The men on this base knew that if nuclear war began, they would be the first to launch their planes, and perhaps also the first to be destroyed. In 1958, the planes that flew from Sculthorpe were B-66B bombers, medium-range aircraft designed to attack targets in Eastern Europe and the fringes of the Soviet Union. The main nuclear weapon they carried was the Mark V tactical bomb. It was a direct descendant of the bomb which destroyed Nagasaki, though slimmed down and in a lighter aluminium casing. Inside the casing, blocks of high explosive were fitted together into a giant sphere weighing more than 1,000 pounds. Inside there was a sphere of uranium-238, and inside that, if the bomb was armed, a sphere or capsule of plutonium. Each block of high explosive had its own detonator, and the nuclear blast was achieved by setting them off simultaneously. Leander Cunningham's job was to maintain the circuits and firing mechanisms of the bomb. It was a job that caused its own kind of tension and stress.
It's the tension that goes with meeting all of the schedules, with meeting all of these fine tolerances, with being absolutely sure that this is perfect and that is perfect and this is perfect. And when you live with that over a long period of time, I know eventually that it kind of made you nervous. And I think that the longer you were with it, it's sort of an insidious thing. I know it was for me, because, of course, with all these other things involved, plus this, that when I got to the point where it was really affecting me, I couldn't function properly.
Inside the American bases like Sculthorpe, practice alerts could happen at any minute of the day or night. When the bell rang, the crews had 3 minutes to reach their planes, which were already armed with nuclear weapons. By the end of the 3 minutes, the first plane had to be ready for takeoff at the end of the runway.
That were warmed up or lined up ready to take off, and all the other, your second wave were being started, warmed up, ready to take off, just like in a war. Just like in Vietnam, just like any place in a war. Once that bell rings, you assume a war posture until you're told this is a practice. And they might ring that bell, and you go out and react, and you get right in that posture, and everything is ready to go, and then they say, okay, it's all clear. Everybody go home. And you go back home, and you sit down and get your first cup of coffee, and the bell rings again. And then you take off again.
At Sculthorpe, Leander Cunningham worked in the atomic bomb dump, and it was here that his life began to fall apart. In 1956, American forces went on alert for the Suez Crisis, and Cunningham's unit had a high-level inspection. His work was good, but the strain was beginning to tell. His young daughter was seriously ill, and Cunningham became depressed. In 1957, the nuclear technician was sent to what was then a US Air Force mental hospital near Swindon. He was treated with a method that was then fashionable and is now largely discredited. Electroconvulsive therapy, or ECT, electric shocks applied to the brain. After 3 weeks of this kind of treatment, Cunningham was sent back to Sculthorpe Air Base, still a deeply disturbed and troubled man.
I've been told by wiser people than I in the medical profession that sooner or later something would happen, because I was kind of like a walking time piece. I'm going to say bomb.
Back in the closed world of Sculthorpe Air Base, Cunningham was given a new job with a lighter workload. But the part of the base that his commanders sent him to showed their astonishing misjudgment. Building 181 was a vital area handling nuclear weapons. It was next to the flight line, serving the 4 bombers that stayed on full-time nuclear-armed alert. Building 181 no longer exists, but it was sited in the center of the picture next to the taxiway. It was a metal building painted black and was one of the most secure areas on the base.
It was a hangar-like type of building, but not a huge hangar, a small hangar. They had guards in the area. They had guards on the doors and so forth. The whole area was surrounded by about a 10-foot fence like in a prison, and that was guarded.
Why was the building so important?
Well, this was an armament building. It was that's where you arm the bomb. That's where you make the marriage. That's where you bring them, you make the match. The detonator with the bomb itself. And, of course, when you get the two of them together, then you got a match.
It was just before noon on October the 30th, 1958, that something snapped inside Leander Cunningham. With Building 181 quiet during the lunch hour, Cunningham stole an automatic pistol from a vehicle parked outside.
I went right to the guns. I took one out. It was encased in plastic, and there was some ammunition there. I took, to the best of my knowledge, 4 bullets. I stuck them in a pocket of what they call a flight jacket, which had some big pockets in it. I stuck them in there, and I looked around, and nobody paying any attention to me. And so I went back in the building and went up the ladder and got in the loft and started my little sojourn up there.
The loft overlooked the area where at least 2 Mark V bombs were being worked on. In the words of a later Pentagon statement, Cunningham then threatened to commit suicide by firing into a nuclear bomb.
I was angry. I'm not sure exactly who I was angry at. I guess everybody and everything, including the Air Force, the British, the Atomic Energy Commission, the Pentagon, my father, who had no business dying when I was 14.
Sergeant John Stone of the Air Police was one of the first to hear what had happened.
Has the wing confirmed holding at their fail-safe points?
Yes, sir. The confirmations have all just come in.
Very well. Now listen to me carefully. The base is being put on condition red. I want this flashed to all sections immediately.
Condition red, sir, yes. Jolly good idea. Keeps the men on their toes.
Group Captain, I'm afraid this is not an exercise.
Not an exercise, sir.
Well, I was at home and having lunch with my wife, and Sergeant Doolin came up to the door and told us that we were in trouble and that we had a problem. We were informed at that time to close down the base, move the people out, get everybody out of this area, and secure the area.
It was 12:15. Sculthorpe went on emergency alert. Offices and workshops were cleared. Nuclear-armed bombers were moved away from Building 181. At the main gate, an American sergeant and his English wife drove up to take their 2 young sons to be immunized at the base hospital.
The security police told us to take cover in the first available building. We weren't too sure where to go, but we did know a family on base.
So we ran towards Sally's house, and she beckoned to us through the little slit in the Venetian blinds, and she literally dragged us in the house and told us to lie on the floor under the table.
I really didn't want to take cover. I sat down in the living room talking to him and said, "What's happening?" And he said, a man went berserk, and he's in an ammunition dump, ready to blow up the big one, the big bomb.
Inside Building 181, an extraordinary drama was taking place. When Sergeant Stone of the Air Police looked inside, he saw Master Sergeant Cunningham standing on a loft above the work area. Below him, the commander of the Sculthorpe Air Base, Colonel Reginald Clisby, whom Cunningham had apparently ordered to stand next to one of the Mark V atomic bombs. In Leander Cunningham's hand was an automatic pistol with the hammer cocked.
With the Master Sergeant just standing there, and he just said, "Hey, he's going to kill us all," at the time, at one time.
He said what?
Going to kill us all. Going to get rid of everybody there in the area. And he had the weapon aimed, and even every time he moved, had to be, every time he blinked, had to be a situation as, you know, you glue your eyes to the finger on the trigger and see if it's getting white.
But I do remember thinking a number of times, now, you don't want to hurt anybody. It was a very, to say the least, unusual situation. I didn't want to kill anybody. I didn't want to blow anybody up. Have you ever been so poofed that you could just barely navigate? Well, that's the way I felt. But I felt that way for 6 months.
But was there a nuclear threat? The official answer in Britain and America has always been no. It was not until 4 years after this dramatic day that the Prime Minister Harold Macmillan finally answered a question about it in the House of Commons. He told the House that no atomic weapons were involved. In fact, there were at least 2 Mark V bombs. Macmillan also told the House that there was no fissionable material in the building, apparently a reference to the plutonium capsules that armed the weapons. But in the same year, the Pentagon in Washington told a different story. They said that there was an atomic bomb, but that there wouldn't have been a nuclear explosion even if Cunningham's bullet had struck the nuclear core. We asked Colonel James Ryan of the United States Air Force to explain.
As I remember it, in the armaments loading building, the bombs were being prepared to be loaded onto the aircraft. The active nuclear material was separate from the triggering device with a either electromechanical or mechanical apparatus. And therefore, well, let me go on and explain that the active material would have been inserted only when the aircraft and bomb were on its way to the target, on their way to the target. So what I'm saying is at the time that he had the pistol, the active material was physically, although co-located with the bomb, but it was physically separate. and therefore there would not have been a nuclear detonation for that reason.
The process Colonel Ryan describes was known as pre-arming the bomb. The capsule of plutonium was placed inside the casing of the bomb, but outside the high explosive sphere. The bomb was like this when it was loaded on the planes. If needed, the pilot could arm it by starting an electric motor which pushed the plutonium into place. On the ground, in the pre-armed state, the high explosive could not start a nuclear reaction, but it could scatter deadly plutonium if set off by something like a bullet.
Well, I think what would have happened, we would have had obviously an explosion, and there would have been fragments of everything, the building, the bomb, the equipment inside all over the place. Also, that plutonium would be scattered over the ground, and it would have had to have been cleaned up. They would have had to move people out of the way until they went in with counters and said that the radiation half-life had been exceeded and it was safe to go back in there again.
Near Sculthorpe Air Base are the villages and country towns of North Norfolk, with names like Fakenham and Little Snoring. If the Air Force explanation is correct, were the people of this area at any kind of risk on that day? One expert believes that they were.
Well, the main danger would be fire, burning the plutonium. Plutonium is a metal rather like sodium. It burns rather easily, and it often burns into very small particles which can be inhaled into the lung. And if they sit in the lung, they irradiate the lung very heavily, particularly with alpha particles, and therefore the carcinogenic effect can be considerable. An explosion would blow the roof of the building off. The fire would take the plutonium particles up, probably to some high altitude, and then it would be scattered around the countryside by the wind. The effect would be to make the area on which it fell uninhabitable. You would have to evacuate the area and decontaminate it. It probably means removing the topsoil.
On October the 30th, 1958, the tension mounted in Building 181. By late afternoon, attempts to talk Cunningham down seemed to be failing, and Sergeant Stone of the Air Police was ordered to bring up a sniper to kill Cunningham if required.
When was he supposed to open fire?
Well, if the commander dropped his hat or gave him, he was given a hand signal to shoot him, he would have pulled the trigger. That was his instructions, to take him out.
I was trying to think of some good things along with all these bad things that kept going through my mind. And I remember thinking of going back to my youth when we built a tennis court, and me and my buddies were playing tennis. I remembered some incidents at the hometown swimming pool, a very small town, but we had a swimming pool, and just events that were very pleasant to me, and it sort of come back to me a couple of weeks later. It sort of felt like a dream.
Inside the building, Cunningham was rambling incoherently. Then at 8:20 p.m., more than 8 hours after it all began, the crisis suddenly ended.
Cunningham just sort of slumped over, and they went up and they took the weapon. And of course, the situation went back to normal, and he was taken into the military hospital. And that, sort of, everybody, it's like real high and then it's complete letdown. You just sort of flop where you are and try to get everything back together, because it was such an enormous push and then nothing, complete nothing. It's over.
When Cunningham's pistol was examined, it was found with the hammer cocked and a live round in the chamber. 30 years later, that day is still remembered in America's nuclear air force.
Position. Let's prepare to copy the message.
At Vandenberg Air Base in California, they train the next generation of men who will guard the weapons of distraction.
I have it. Appears as though we have a good message. I agree. Step one, let's get the launch keys out of the safe.
To fire a missile, 4 keys must turn simultaneously. All servicemen who work with nuclear weapons are now carefully screened. They will stay under permanent surveillance.
Enable. All the sorties are enabled. Let's prepare to key turn. I agree. Hands on keys. Key turn. Hold for 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Release.
The training is called the Personnel Reliability Programme, and it entered military regulations following the drama at Sculthorpe in England.
It was a shocking event, and it caused us to relook at the program to improve the program. And I believe that we have done that. We have a very, very careful selection process before people can go into the program. We look at background investigation. We look at past medical records. And so I'm very, very proud of our record. We haven't had an incident like that since then. So hopefully that's a sign that things are improving.
But for a journalist in England who covered the Sculthorpe drama at the time, the memories are more frustrating. For reporters' efforts to find out the truth of what had happened were blocked by official denials and evasions.
They wouldn't admit, and they never have admitted, and they never did admit that they had nuclear weapons on the base. They just said he was in there and that he'd got a gun and they were trying to talk him out.
Where did they say he was exactly?
They said he was in the parachute tower, which was where they kept some explosives, but they would never say that explosives were involved, and they never said anything about nuclear weapons of any kind at all.
The only people not to know the full story of what happened at Sculthorpe were the British public. There were then, and perhaps still are, fears that nuclear worries would alarm people and boost support for CND. In 1962, the Prime Minister, Harold Macmillan, answered a question in the House of Commons after some details were released in Washington. In Macmillan's words, the American serviceman locked himself in a shed for 8 hours. The anxiety was not that he might explode an atomic bomb. There were none there, but that he might do something foolish with a pistol. Lord Ward of Witley was the Secretary of State for Air at the time of the Sculthorpe incident. He recalls Macmillan telling Parliament that no nuclear weapons were involved.
Yes, he did. But he was misinformed then.
You're saying that the Prime Minister was misinformed?
Well, I think he must have been, because we know there were atomic bombs in the building.
In the statement, the building that this happened in is described as a shed, whereas in fact it was one of the most secure and important buildings on the whole base.
Yes, but it was an isolated case at an American Air Force base that didn't concern us at all. It didn't concern the Royal Air Force at all. And it ended peacefully anyway. Nothing happened. And the importance of it, I think, was overlooked at the time.
But at Sculthorpe, the base commander, Colonel Reginald Clisby, was decorated by the US Air Force, along with 2 other officers and 2 airmen. The citation spoke of their exemplary courage and heroism. Leander Cunningham was treated with humanity by the US Air Force. He was flown back to America and committed to a mental hospital for 3 years. He then began a normal life in the civilian community. Today, with his memories, he remains a casualty of the nuclear age. An age which ended for him on one day in October 1958.